The revelation I want to share today is built around a misunderstanding so common and so deeply held that most people over 50 have never examined it. A misunderstanding that is actively preventing them from taking the single most financially productive action available to them right now. The misunderstanding is about what $500 a month is. And by the time I finish explaining what it actually is, I believe you will understand why the question is not whether $500 a month is enough to matter. The question, the only financially relevant question, is whether you are treating it as though it matters. My name is William Grant, and the revelation is this: $500 a month is not a savings amount. It is a compounding unit, and those two things produce completely different financial outcomes over time. Not because the money is different, but because the orientation toward the money is different. A savings amount is something you accumulate. You put it away, it sits, it grows slowly, and you measure its progress by looking at the balance. A compounding unit is something you deploy. You commit it to a structure where it generates returns. Those returns themselves generate returns, and the progress it makes is not linear, but exponential, in ways that make the cumulative outcome dramatically different from what any individual month's contribution would suggest. This distinction matters enormously for someone over 50, because the standard narrative about investing after 50 is built around the savings amount frame. The narrative says that you should have started earlier, that the window is closing, that the time you have remaining is insufficient for investment to produce real results. That narrative is wrong in a specific and demonstrable way, and it is wrong precisely because it treats investment after 50 as savings accumulation rather than as compounding deployment. The mathematics of compound growth do not stop being powerful at 50. What changes is the structure that most efficiently captures those mathematics, given a shorter accumulation window and a different set of objectives than a 30-year-old would have. The structure question, how to deploy $500 a month most effectively after 50, is where the real work happens, and it is where most people get stuck because they approach it as a product question rather than an objective question. They ask what they should invest in. The better question is what the money needs to accomplish, over what timeline, under what risk constraints, and with what eventual purpose. $500 a month directed toward a tax-advantaged retirement account, invested primarily in low-cost, broadly diversified equity index funds during the accumulation years, and gradually shifted toward income-generating assets as the distribution horizon approaches, is a fundamentally different thing from $500 sitting in a savings account generating marginal interest, even though the monthly contribution is identical. The difference is not in the amount. It is in the structure that determines what the amount does over time. I want to be concrete about what $500 a month actually produces in a well-structured vehicle over different time horizons, because abstract claims about the power of compounding are less useful than specific illustrations. At an average annual return of 7%, conservative for a diversified equity portfolio over a long period, $500 a month invested consistently for 10 years produces approximately $87,000. For 12 years, the same amount produces approximately $123,000. For 15 years, it produces approximately $178,000. These numbers are not guaranteed. Markets do not produce smooth 7% annual returns, and some years produce negative results, but they represent the historical expectation of what a broadly diversified, low-cost equity position has returned over meaningful periods in developed markets. And they illustrate something that many people over 50 have never internalized. The difference in outcome between 10, 12, and 15 years of consistent investment is enormous. even though the monthly contribution is identical. Every additional year of consistent investment adds value that is not simply additive, but multiplicative, because the returns already accumulated begin compounding on the new contributions and on each other simultaneously. This is why the timing of beginning matters far more than the question of whether the amount is sufficient. The question of sufficiency is almost always framed incorrectly. People ask whether $500 is enough money, when the actual question is whether $500 consistently invested over the remaining working years is enough to change the shape of what retirement looks like. The answer to the correctly framed question is almost always yes. Not because $500 produces spectacular wealth, because $500 consistently invested for 10 or more years produces options, specific, real, financially grounded options about how to structure the retirement years that do not exist in the absence of that investment. The structure that makes $500 most powerful has specific components, and understanding each one is worth the time it takes to think through carefully. The first is tax treatment. Money invested in a tax-advantaged account, a Roth IRA, a traditional IRA, or an employer-sponsored retirement plan, grows without the annual tax drag that would reduce the compounding effect in a taxable account. At the margin, the difference between a tax-advantaged and a taxable investment over 10 or 12 years is not trivial. For someone over 50, the IRS allows catch-up contributions that increase the annual limit above what younger investors can contribute, a provision designed specifically for people in this situation that a significant number of eligible people never use. The second structural component is cost. Investment fees, management expenses, fund expense ratios, advisor charges represent a continuous drag on compounding that compounds negatively just as effectively as returns compound positively. A fund that charges 1.5% annually costs significantly more than a fund that charges 15 basis points over a 10-year period at typical return levels. This is not a marginal difference. It is a structural one. And choosing low-cost index funds rather than actively managed funds charging significantly higher fees is one of the highest return decisions available to someone beginning or restructuring an investment program after 50. The third structural component is consistency. The mathematics of compounding reward consistency above all other variables. A person who invests $500 every month, without exception, for 10 years produces a meaningfully better outcome than a person who invests $700 in good months and nothing in months when something else competes for the money, even if the average monthly contribution is the same. The variability itself costs, because contributions made during market downturns, which most people miss when they invest inconsistently, are the contributions that buy the most shares at the lowest prices and produce the highest subsequent returns. Automation. The commitment to have the money transferred to the investment account before it enters the checking account, without requiring a human decision each month, is the structural mechanism that produces the consistency that produces the compounding. The fourth component is the objective alignment of the portfolio. After 50, the investment horizon has two distinct phases: an accumulation phase during the remaining working years, and a distribution phase during retirement. A portfolio structured exclusively for accumulation, maximum growth, maximum risk tolerance, is not appropriately aligned with the full horizon of someone who will need the money to generate income within a decade or so. The appropriate structure tilts toward equities for growth during accumulation and incorporates a meaningful allocation to dividend-paying equities and shorter duration fixed income as the distribution phase approaches, so that the transition from accumulation to income generation does not require selling growth assets at arbitrary market prices when income is needed. None of what I have described requires expertise to implement. It requires a decision to begin, a structural commitment to automate, an understanding of the objective being served, and the discipline to not make changes based on market noise or emotional reaction to short-term volatility. The enemy of $500 a month is not the amount. The enemy is the tendency to treat it as optional, to allow it to flow into spending in the months when something else competes for it, and to invest it in the months when it feels easy and nothing is competing. Optionality is what destroys the compounding effect. The commitment to non-optionality, to make the $500 the first obligation rather than the remainder after everything else, is what transforms it from a modest monthly gesture into a meaningful structural feature of the financial life it is building. The invitation I want to leave you with is specific and actionable and does not require waiting for the right moment. Today, calculate the number of months between now and the age at which you intend to stop working. Multiply that number by 500. That product, the total amount of contributions over the remaining working years, understates the final portfolio value by a factor that depends on market returns over the period, but it gives you a floor from which to understand what consistent commitment actually produces. Then ask yourself honestly whether that floor, combined with whatever other retirement resources you have or will have, changes the financial character of your retirement. In almost every case, the honest answer is yes. The only remaining question is whether you will begin.